My name is Anita Dare. I love books. I love to read them. I love to write them. I've traveled all over where I've found incredible stories, but the ones that are closest to my heart are the ones from right here. This is Made in Manitoba, Stories from Home, a show about Manitoba books and the authors who write them. Welcome to Made in Manitoba, Stories from Home. Our guest today is my friend, Winnipeg author and former teacher librarian, Harriet Zaidman, author of City on Strike. Harriet will talk about her novel and the research that went into it, and a little later on she'll show us some of the dishes from her cooking blog, North and Nosh. Welcome, Harriet Zaidman.
Well, thank you for having me, Anita. It's very nice to be here.
Oh, I'm so glad to see you again. Always glad to see you. City on Strike is your fourth book, but your first novel. You actually have 3 picture books.
Right.
Out. And you brought them?
I did.
Before we get into talking about City on Strike, how about you show us these beautiful, colorful picture books?
Okay, well, this is my first book, which I published with a former student, actually. She did the art.
Okay.
It was sort of a coincidental meeting with Sarah Neville, and she actually told me that she'd grown up and become an artist. I remembered that she had been so interested in art as a student, and I said, well, what kind of art do you do? She says, well, my specialty is painting dogs.
I love it.
So we had a good collaboration, and this is just based on my dog trying to get on the couch all the time and my futile efforts to keep her off. She learns lessons from looking at the books, solves all the family's problems.
Yep.
And she
As dogs do.
As dogs do, and she finally gets a library card out of it.
Wonderful.
Just choose her own books.
And very quickly, your other 2 books, let us see those beautiful books.
Okay, Sherman and the Sheep Shape Contest.
I love it.
I love sheep. It's about a sheep who they can't get into the shape. Their shepherds run contests to get their sheep into shape with dogs barking them into the positions. And this is about that.
And your third book?
This is about Benny's Dream Horse. Actually, this came from a story my father told us about growing up in the north end of Winnipeg, about the next door neighbor who had a horse, promising kids horses. I've changed it so that this kid wants to be a cowboy, can't see that dream realized. He steals the horse, and then what happens when he steals the horse? It actually turns out to be a better result than what he intended.
And speaking of North End Winnipeg, that brings us to our subject for today, your book, City on Strike. Why don't you tell us what it's about?
Well, City on Strike is set during the Winnipeg General Strike of 1919, which was the largest labor event in Canada. 35,000 people at least walked out of their jobs in 1919 for 6 weeks. For higher wages and better working conditions. People all over North America were on strike frequently in those days because of the great poverty that was everywhere. And all the events coalesced so that in Winnipeg, something that was supposed to last a very short period of time ended up being 6 weeks long, mostly because the employers and the government refused to negotiate and kept people out, tried to starve them out, and then finally attacked the strike with the Northwest Mounted Police.
Hugely significant history for Winnipeg, but this isn't a work of nonfiction, it's historical fiction. So what is the story about? Who's it about?
The story is about 2 children, and the way events affect them. These are children of an immigrant family, very poor immigrant family, and it's representative of many, many families at the time. Live in a house with no running water, didn't have sewage in those days. Disease was very common. Winnipeg had a very high child death rate because of the situation with services, and these children are wondering, their father and their mother both support the strike, and what is going to happen to them. And they both try to support the strike, and yet they find themselves challenged as to whether they can support the strike, and it's how they get through it.
Such a loving family, such a close family, and you tell the story in alternating chapters with the brother and the sister, and the brother is a mail carrier, or not a mail carrier,
a
newspaper boy.
And I made him a newspaper boy because he would get around the city. I based it on my dad, who was a newspaper boy. My father wasn't born then, he was born in 1922, but it's the same thing. Like, he knew a lot more about the city because he had to go sell papers downtown or wherever. And so I gave the boy that flexibility. He learns a lot, meets different kinds of people that he would not normally have. And his sister's 11, and she's still a little innocent. She's on, she's wanting to be an adult.
She's window shopping with her friends.
Yeah. And so when she is exposed to the events of the strike, it's more jarring to her. But it's it's her way of experiencing the strike. I wanted to give two different kinds of outlooks
and different experiences. And the boy, he's a little bit older and much more aware of the need for money. Mm-hmm. And so he is really conflicted. And I think you do this just beautifully when he breaks the strike because he wants to sell newspapers south of the river. And he's selling not the Winnipeg Free Press, the Manitoba Free Press.
Manitoba
Free Press.
I based that on a real memoir on someone who broke the strike.
And he's actually physically ill. Yeah. He brings this money, he lies to his parents as to where the money came from so that they can buy food for the table, but he's so physically ill by what he's done that he can't eat it. Mm-hmm.
When the provincial government mandated school, because they didn't have compulsory education, to certain ages, when they mandated it, children of, say 10, 12, 13 and all that, they all went to school, work part-time. So that's why children worked part-time, was they had to support their families. They could no longer work full-time. So, but all the kids had part-time jobs trying to help out. So it was completely normal for Jack to be doing that.
At some point in the story, there's sort of the idea of things don't change, right?
Right.
And I was struck by how similar certain things are to today in terms of newspaper headlines. Today we have fake news, and there was so much propaganda with the different headlines. There's
all the newspapers in town, there were 6 newspapers in Winnipeg, and then the newspapers around the country were absolutely opposed to the strike and created an incredible hysteria about Bolsheviks honing in on Winnipeg and trying to foment revolution. They had sent 6 people here or 4 people here, like they just made up numbers and made things. And they never wanted to address the issue of the disastrous working conditions that people were subjected to, or the terrible wages. Prices had risen 80% during the war, but wages had been held down. Mm. It cost about $1,800 for a family of 5, say, to survive, but the average wage was about $900 a year. So people were starving. Yeah. Like literally.
And depending on which newspaper they subscribed to, that's the truth that they believed in. Whatever their own ideals were, those were the headlines that they read. And so just like today, the headlines that you read sort of solidify your own beliefs.
Well, they certainly did want to do that. And one of the quotes and the things that the newspaper said, it's just appalling. This is a quote from the Winnipeg Telegram. It talked about the immigrants. It said, "Their ignorance is impenetrable. Their customs are repulsive. Their civilization is primitive. Their characters and morals are justly condemned. They are surely not the class of people paid immigration agents should seek. They are the scum of Europe." So it was okay for these people, my relatives and everyone else's relatives, to come here and work for absolute slave wages, to suffer in order for these people to profit. But they should not demand to be treated with dignity or to be rewarded accordingly. You know.
We will continue this conversation. You're tuned into Made in Manitoba Stories from Home with today's guest, Harriet Zaidman, author of City on Strike. I'm your host, Anita Dare. We'll be right back. Just joining us, we're speaking today with Winnipeg-based author Harriet Zaidman. Welcome back.
Nice to be here.
Last segment, we were talking a little bit about how things don't change, certain things. And during the break, we were talking about the pandemic, the coronavirus, and how it's affecting people. In your novel, of course, you do talk about the Spanish flu. Mm-hmm. And when I read your novel, I was struck just by some of those similarities. But one of the things I'm curious about, back then, neighbors really helped neighbors. If there was somebody with the Spanish flu, and really it was so common, everybody had it, much as is happening in other parts of the world, although very severe in most cases with the Spanish flu for anybody who got it, including with one of our main characters, the father.
Right.
He ended up, which is how he lost his job,
Right.
and they were really struggling. But I'm interested in your thoughts as to, you know, our society now. Are we more distant from our neighbors? I wonder if we'd have that same helping out.
Well, that's very true. I think that what they did in 1918, because there was such a barrier, such a division in society ethnically, you know, many of the ethnic groups both didn't trust and didn't know how to approach the government, for instance, the city government, and they weren't treated well. So the ethnic groups just went and organized among themselves. Everybody who spoke the same language or came from the same area, they mobilized. And many people knew each other, were related, or had threads. You know, there were these threads through the community. So they did. So the city did have, you know, a structure that they set up, but it wasn't a friendly structure that people felt that they could approach. And people were quite afraid of it. One thing they were also afraid of was, you know, maybe being deported, because there was just this great animosity towards immigrants, and they would find some way, you know, so there was this distrust of the immigrants to go, plus they had to pay to go to the hospital. So people did take care of each other, whether it was with food or clothing or some kind of nursing. They did. That
helping each other out of neighbors and just the toughness, the strength of family, the closeness to family. I mean, every Winnipegger knows that's North End Winnipeg. That is our, you know, our generations of people who came here. And this is your family story as well. So who are these people in the photo?
Well, this is a great photo that we only discovered a few years ago. So this is my great-grandfather, my great-grandmother. This is my grandmother, Goldie, who is in the story, her sister, Jenny. And this is my dad at age 7. This is a photo from 1929. And there were two more siblings. There's 4. There were 2 more siblings to come.
So your parents were born right shortly after this
very
they were
born in
significant
1922.
time period. But their parents experienced this.
They did.
Did you have family stories? Did family stories come down about that
Only
time?
a few. Like one of my grandmothers, the other grandmother, was a garment worker, and she walked out. That's all I know. And my grandfather, married to Goldie, was a young man, like age 22 maybe or something like that. I'm not quite sure. He tried to pull a Mountie off his horse because people were being beaten. The Mounties had these big batons and they were beating people. And I do know that he did try to yank someone off. I don't know if he was successful, but he hid in their root cellar when he got home because they were going around arresting, and they did deport a sizable number of people.
The father had to hide in the root cellar, and the family, no cell phones, can't text home. Family had no idea where he was.
And
so that came from a true story.
It did,
Yeah, so many truths in your story, and that's the joy of being a writer, that you can weave in some truths and also make things up. You have significant historical figures in here, but others you had to make up. I was really interested in the story of the son of
A.J. Andrews.
A.J. Andrews.
I did make him up because I needed someone. I needed Jack to meet someone on the other side. I could have maybe created a relationship with a girl. I considered that, but I wanted that boy. Boys had more independence, and I wanted them to meet later, and so I created that situation.
And towards the end of the story, I mean, you really show his growth as well. I mean, he's not a major player, but you show that he can be an independent thinker. And I think that's a wonderful message for any young person reading this book. Now, you have a really strong love of history, clearly. Where did that come from?
Well, that came from my parents. I really credit them. We used to read the newspaper after suppers. Newspapers were delivered at 4:30 in the afternoon when I grew up. And after supper, my parents would read the paper. And they would talk about all the world events, and then somehow some history would come out of, especially by my dad and my mom too. My mom read fiction And so she knew things through fiction. And that's where I picked up a love of fiction from. And she also read for an hour a day, so I used to copy that. And when I was little, I actually picked up, when I was in grade 2, I picked up A Tale of Two Cities. We didn't have that many books, but I thought I should copy what my mother did. I know.
I read it in grade 7. I thought I was pretty advanced.
Well, I got through it. I decided to, it took me, and I would come home every day and read for half an hour.
I was still reading Mr. Muggs.
I know. Well, we didn't have that many books in the house, so I picked one of the books. And I remember pieces of it, but like that was a model. It was a good model for me. And as was reading the newspaper after supper, because I decided I had to do that. And then over the years, I started to read harder and harder things. As I was less scared of the news items, I would read more and more news items. But that's where I got to learn about the world. And my parents, to their credit, never talked down to us. They didn't avoid telling us about what was going on in the world.
And one of your main characters, Jack, that I thought that was really interesting, and that's how he got to learn about the world as well, because he read the newspapers. He read the newspapers, and he always made a point of bringing the paper home. Mm-hmm. So I did think that was really interesting how you read the paper. You read the papers as well. You say as a family you read the paper. Did you read it out loud? Did the family read it out loud, or did you actually take that and were reading it yourself?
Well, everybody took a section, but then they would talk about an item, and so you'd hear about it, and then you might read it later or not. But it just sort of set the model that you were supposed to be interested in what was going on in the world, and you could talk about it.
So as a writer, you also wrote a column for years. You write your North End Nosh, which we're going to get into in a moment. You write book reviews, but you also write for children, maybe because you were in those schools for so long. What do you hope your readers will take away from your work?
Well, I will hope that they would take away that they have to be critical thinkers. They have to examine what is behind a claim. For instance, the claims that Bolsheviks were taking over Winnipeg, when there was never any claim by the strike committee, never. And history has borne that out if you want to investigate it. It was a fabricated claim that the City Committee of 1000 made. So to look behind what the rhetoric and to push away those ideas and look at the objective issue. What was going on? There was no insurrection. There was a demand. And to look, why would they be promoting racist ideas? Why were they trying to divide people? It was because they were trying to divide and conquer.
Yeah, and you really make sure that your children, your students, would think about this.
Yes.
This is how you were as a teacher too.
That's right.
I imagine, and it's certainly the message that comes through in the book with the characters. Very well done. You're watching Made in Manitoba Stories from Home with today's guest, Harriet Zaidman, author of City on Strike. I'm your host, Anita Dare. When we come back, Harriet's going to show us some of the dishes she features on her blog, North End Nosh. Welcome back to Made in Manitoba Stories from Home. I'm your host, Anita Dare. We've been speaking with author Harriet Zaidman about her novel, City on Strike. In this segment, Harriet will take us on a different sort of journey through food. And I'm salivating here. It all smells so good. These are all recipes that you feature on your blog, North End Nosh. How did North End Nosh come about?
Well, I used to write a recipe column for a publication that went out of, stopped publishing. And then I have often had friends over, and we have baking days together. We each teach each other what to do, how to make desserts or whatever. And one thing I've done is taught people how to make bread, because a lot of people don't make bread.
Like you might be having a group of children's books authors coming up maybe
like
in a month or so?
Yeah,
I think I might have heard of that.
Yeah. So that's the origins of it. And so I decided one day I had time on my hands, and I know how to build a web page, and I thought, I'm going to do this. I had made 1 or 2 self-made movies of how to make a challah, a koilich, and I like to share recipes. So that's how it became.
And you also have a talent for staging the food, taking pictures of food. I mean, I know everybody takes pictures of food, including myself, and we put it all on social media, but they're not as good. Your photos actually look professional.
Well, it's my counter. it's my kitchen counter, or my table, but staging the food, like making it the way you want someone to see it, it takes a moment. And you've got to think about what's on the plate, how should it be positioned.
And your blog is called North End Nosh because it features traditional North End recipes from all immigrant families, or family recipes.
It has a lot of them.
Yeah.
I cook everything.
Yeah.
I cook from all cultures and all that. But I do have some Jewish, as my heritage is Jewish, I do have whatever Jewish recipes I had in my family, and that's the ones I brought today, some special ones that have a history behind them.
Okay, I can't wait anymore. Tell us, what did you bring us?
Well, this is challah. If it's in Yiddish, it's koilich, or kalach in Ukrainian. It's egg bread, and it's braided, and this is good. I promise you. It has a cake-like texture. My recipe has a cake-like texture, and I love to make that. Working with yeast dough, and if you put eggs in it, it has just a great feel to it, and it's just wonderful to watch it.
Is it complicated, all that braiding?
No. No,
I look forward
really
to
not.
one of your lessons.
It's really not. You go forward, you just follow the instructions, and there it is, voila.
And is this a recipe that you had growing up, always around the family table?
Well, sort of. My mother made buns and things like that. She didn't make bread, she made buns. But my parents made, bread was something I knew about. Both my parents both taught me how to make this. My father also knew how to make bread.
Your parents taught you the value of reading a newspaper and how to make bread.
Right.
I love it. These are really good skills.
And to make knishes.
And knishes, okay.
Yeah, this is my mom's recipe for cheese knishes, cottage cheese knishes, and that is a really good recipe.
I saw that recipe on your blog today because I make the crew lunches, and I was going to make these guys, these cheese knishes. I saw them, and I thought, well, maybe that's just too complicated for me. So
No, it's not. You just have to chill the dough, but that is the best, delicious Knish recipe. Everybody loves them. And these are blintzes. This is my grandmother, Baba Goldie's blintzes, and she was actually renowned in the community for her cooking. And that's one of the things that saved them during the Depression, was that she cooked for others who could afford it. And so this recipe for these are also cottage cheese. You can put other fillings in them, but I happen to like cottage cheese. When she died, she didn't leave the recipe because she was an old country cook. She just knew how to make it. And my aunt and my cousin said they spent about a year just fiddling with grains of salt trying to figure it out, and it tastes like hers.
Getting it just right.
Yeah.
Okay, so the knishes and the blintzes, are these Jewish recipes?
They are, but
I mean, everybody uses them, but I think we forget where they came from.
They are.
Yeah.
Although every culture has some different version of them, So blini is what they call them in Ukrainian, So, there's always something. But these are Jewish. This is, it happens to be the holiday of Purim right now. So this is homentashen, the three-cornered hat.
Okay.
And I filled mine. You can fill them with other things, but I filled that. That's the best one I've ever tasted. It comes from my daughter-in-law's grandmother. It's her recipe, actually.
Oh.
And I just love it. The dough has a little tinge of orange zest in it, and the filling is dates, apricots, prunes, and lemon, and with another little bit of orange. And it is I just love that recipe. And so it's hers. It's famous.
And what's it called again?
Homentashen. Homen was in the holiday of Purim. Homen was this evil king. He had a three-cornered hat, and you're eating him.
So that's the meaning behind it. It's very significant having those three corners.
Yeah. And these are kichelech.
Don't ask me to say that.
Okay, I won't.
I'm going to try.
Each individual one is a kichel. But kichelech, and the English translation is nothing. Because what you do is you just beat eggs for several minutes. You just beat air into the eggs. And then you this recipe does not call for flour. A lot of the recipes call for flour, but this recipe uses matzah cake meal. Now matzah really is flour, but I guess it's the way it's constituted. It's beaten crushed into a powder. And the trick with kichelech is the amount of humidity in the air. that's why often they fail. You know, it's just like, oh, because there's too much humidity in here. But not this recipe. This recipe always works. And when you take a bite, it just crumbles and disappears in your mouth.
And so this is baked.
Yep.
Baked and light.
Yeah, they poof up.
My husband's heritage is Ukrainian and German, and I know that there is a Ukrainian cookie called krustike,
yes,
which I've massacred. I'm so sorry. A Saskatchewan girl here, well, East Coast. But anyway, yeah, so I guess that would be one of the similarities. This looks similar to that, and it's also a very light cookie. So
yeah, it just disappears in your mouth, and so you can not feel guilty about eating several, because you can't and you must eat several.
Do you have a favorite dish?
Well, I love them all. I have to say I love them all, but the kichlach are so easy to eat that it's
Kichla.
Kichla.
I think I said. Did I do it right?
Almost. You're
Almost.
There. Yeah, there's a little more time. Just try a few, and you'll probably get better as you eat them.
Kichlach.
Yeah, there you go.
Into your elbow
Into your
these days. Kichlach.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's my recipes, you know. But I cook everything. I've got about 80 or 90 recipes on the blog. I usually do it every one a week. And it's forced me to try new recipes and also to go through your recipe books. You don't realize how many recipes you've got that you haven't made for a while or you really liked, you know. So I've quite enjoyed it.
I love that you brought these in for us today. And in a moment, just before we go, I think we're going to invite the crew to come in. Somebody's going to have to work a camera, but I think we need to share this because it's... Now, if somebody steals one without asking, you might curse them in an old way, and you might say, may your... What is it? May your head be an onion and grow in the ground. Or
Wachsen sollst du wie ein Zwiebel in der Erde. May your head grow like an onion in the ground.
But not today. Come on and enjoy some of this stuff. Thank you, Harriet, for being here with us today.
You're very welcome.
You have been watching Made in Manitoba Stories from Home, a show about Manitoba books and authors. On behalf of our cast and crew, thank you for spending time with us. If you would like to send us a comment, or if you would like to know more about the show, we'll have that information on the screen in just a moment. Thank you. Let's eat.